you. Thank you so much for having me. I think this is, I don't even know, my 6th talk about these wonderful women this month. Yeah. I find it very interesting because modern spiritualism was recognized on March 31st, but yet everybody wants to hear about it in October. So must be the rapping noises. I don't know. I'm not sure. Anyway, I have been the historian and caretaker for the property for 25 years. I used to go to the property when I was a kid, so I have a very long history with the Fox property. I was lucky enough to know the original caretaker, John Drummond, and to me, they, in Newark, it was always referred to as the spook house. And to me, it was never the spook house. It always felt like home. And there is a calmness when you come to the property, and I don't know if it's just because it's rural settings or, people just say, oh, it's out in the country. But Hydesville Road is a very busy road, and it is anything but quiet. 2 years ago, we did a live from the cottage, from the enclosure that holds what's left of the original foundation. And it was live everywhere, Australia, England, you name it. And I was telling the history, and all of a sudden a sheriff's car goes flying by. And so I paused, and then another, and another. And it ended up being 13 sheriff's cars going by, full blast with the sirens. And I don't know what the people on the other end were thinking, but we just stood there going, if it isn't that, it's the trains or the trucks. But for me, even to this day, there is something about this property. Even when it was at its ugliest and overgrown, and nobody would have known what was there unless you grew up in Newark. There's just something about it. And if you get the chance, the property itself is always open. I don't recommend coming in the middle of winter because it is a trek to go through the snow, but spring and summer and fall, it's a beautiful place. It really is, and you can visit the property. The enclosure is locked because that protects our foundation, and that is locked, but if you know me or if you've been to one of my talks, you know that I live less than a mile away. And I really don't get any days off. And I will meet you there. I will show up and I will let you in, and you can listen to me talk for hours and hours and hours. All right, so we're going to dig right into it. I've given this speech so many times, this lecture so many times, that I know it inside and out, yet every time I do it, I change it. Every single time. My assistant has been to the last 4 or 5 talks that I've done, and every time we leave, she's like, you changed it again. I'm like, yeah, I know. I always feel like it's too much, or maybe not enough, or I just don't know. So I just changed it a little. But you'll notice it'll become a conversation, and if I see people, wiggling, rest assured I can read a room, so I'm good, and I know how to wrap it up like that. So, all right, so these are our beautiful Fox sisters here, so we're gonna get going. So it all starts with the history of Hydesville, and it was in 1815 that Dr. Henry Hyde, one of the earlier pioneers, settled in the hamlet that bears his name. And Dr. Hyde came to this area to practice medicine. But he quickly learned that there weren't enough people to practice medicine. And so he went with his plan B, and that was to build a tavern. And he built a tavern and made a ton of money. And with that money, he just started buying up the land. And probably why it's Hydesville. So he would buy the land. And then with all the land that he had, he thought, well, maybe I'll start building houses. And he just kept doing this over and over until this hamlet grew, and there were homes and families. There was a Methodist church, there was a schoolhouse, there were a whole bunch of different merchants and shops. And they say that many of the families were probably related because it was a very nice community and people wanted to be there. So to the south, we know that the digging of the Erie Canal began. And to the east and the north, there were large farms that were blending in with the horizon. It's beautiful country out there. Now, according to the archives in Albany, the Erie Canal should have passed 1 mile south of where Hydesville Road is today. But the farmers of Hydesville, they heard about this and they had a discussion. And they said, we don't want this. We do not want a frog pond, a stagnant body of water affecting our farming, and we have to do something. And so it was decided that they would go out in the night and pull up the stakes and move them farther south. Yes, what a poor decision. What a poor decision. Because we know today, Hydesville is no longer a hamlet, it's actually a road. And we had the village of Newark and the town of Arcadia spring up because of the Erie Canal. Now, between 1815, and this is an original picture of the house itself. So between 1815 and 1847, there were many families that lived in the cottage. And I think a lot of people just think it, we call it the Fox Cottage because it was just the Foxes that lived there. But there were actually several families. And one of those families was the Bell family. And the Bell family is pretty important. They had a young girl, a house guest, if you will, by the name of Lucretia Pulver. She was about 14 years old. And she would stay with them and then go to school during the week. And then in lieu of her, food and her bed, she would do small chores. So she was known as their housekeeper. On the weekends, her parents would come and get her, and then she would go home. Now, during this period, there would be peddlers, and they would travel from town to town, and they would sell their wares to the women of the house. And it was one particular day where a peddler arrived at the cottage where Mrs. Bell and Lucretia were, and he was greeted as if he were an old friend by Mrs. Bell. He was carrying his peddler's pack, which included lace and thimbles and wool and fabrics, needles, you name it, he had it in his little pack. Now, Mrs. Bell and Lucretia, they were looking over the items very carefully, and they were really enjoying this in-home shopping. And as the afternoon passed, Mr. Bell would come home, and Lucretia was looking very carefully at some of the fabric, and she decided that she wanted this fabric. But the shopping was interrupted by Mrs. Bell, who pulled Lucretia into another room, and she said, I don't need you to be here anymore, and I'm going to take you home. Now, Lucretia was a little concerned and not understanding what was going on, so she started to gather her things to get ready for the ride home, and she went over to the peddler and she said, excuse me, but I really want this fabric. Is there any way that you could come into town to my father's house and he'll pay you for the fabric? And he agreed. He didn't have a problem with that. And he said, I will probably be there within 3 days' time. Well, much to Lucretia's surprise, the peddler never showed up. And even more surprising, Mrs. Bell appeared 3 days later and asked her to come back in service. Now, on the ride back to the cottage, Mrs. Bell was just brimming with joy. And she was talking about all these beautiful things and all these interesting trinkets that she had purchased from the peddler. And Lucretia, well, being 14, wasn't really happy. She was a little grumpy about it and didn't have much to say. Now, back at the cottage later that night, Lucretia started hearing rapping noises at the foot of her bed, and it started to frighten her because this hadn't happened before. Now, at first, when she would tell Mrs. Bell, she would explain it away and, "Oh, Lucretia, it's just a dream." But Lucretia insisted it was real. And the rapping noises continued. And eventually they began to disturb the Bells, especially Mrs. Bell. But they had no explanation as to what was causing them. One night, Lucretia went to the cellar to get some potatoes for the evening meal and sank into a loose area of dirt. Frightened, she screamed for help. Mrs. Bell, looking into the cellar, asked, "What is your problem? Why are you screaming?" And Lucretia said, "I just fell in a hole." Well, Mrs. Bell said, "It must be those rats." And she asked her husband to go out into the field and bring in some dirt and field stones to secure the floor. Well, the noises continued night after night, and finally, at her wit's end, Lucretia begged her parents to leave the house. It was also around that time that Mrs. Bell's health really started to decline. It was a short time later that the Bells would make the decision to leave the cottage and head to their neighboring Loch Berlin. The next family we know that moved in was the Weekman family. They weren't there very long. They consisted of 2 parents and 2 children, and they had a housekeeper named Jane. They lived in the cottage for almost a year. As soon as they moved in, they started to experience the rapping sounds. And that frustrated Mr. Weekman because he was a no-nonsense kind of guy. And they would hear these noises, and he would run to the window, and it would be nothing. He would hear noises, run to the door, and there was nothing. He wasn't having a very good night. The situation would escalate when one daughter felt a cold hand while falling asleep. And this would prompt the children to get into their parents' bed almost on a nightly basis. And we all know how much fun it is to sleep with children. One night, the housekeeper, Jane, claimed to see a young man in gray trousers and a black jacket. But they told her it must have been a dream and forbid her to talk about it. After a while, the family had enough and left the cottage, and it remained vacant until December 1847, when John and Margaret Fox and their daughters moved in. Yes, there is the handsome Fox family. John Fox and Margaret Smith Fox began their life together in 1812. Mr. Fox was a blacksmith by trade, and he was a very good provider for his family. He was industrious and honest, but like all people, he had some faults, his weakness being alcohol. However, John and Margaret shared a common bond in their faith as devout Methodists. Margaret Smith Fox differed from her husband. They say she was an adventurous soul who displayed a calm dignity of being. She was also noted for her impeccable character. And that's going to come to play soon. She's going to need that. Their first child, Emily, was born in 1813 and passed on in infancy. The following year, Anne Leah joined the family. Subsequently, Maria, Elizabeth, and David were born at 2-year intervals. Eventually, Margaret Fox separated from her husband, unable to tolerate his alcoholism any longer. For a period of 14 years, not much is known about the Foxes, or the Fox family. The next recorded event was the reunion of Margaret with her newly reformed and sober husband, John. And in 1834, Margaretta Fox was born, followed in 1836 by the birth of Catherine Fox. John and Margaret Fox decided they would settle near their family. First, they went to Rochester and lived with Leah for a brief period. She wasn't much fun to live with. Then, in search of a quieter environment, the family moved to Hydesville, where on land adjoining their son David, John Fox would build a new home for his family. On December 11th, 1847, the Fox family temporarily moved into the cottage in Hydesville. It was a very long winter, and it's coming up. Oh, and I can only imagine what it was like back then. And the family was looking forward to spring, mostly so they could resume construction on their home. As Mrs. Fox entered the cottage, she could be heard saying, "I am certain this house is haunted." Now, during this time, raps were heard in the cottage, and Mrs. Fox sought to explain the noises away. Perhaps it's a cobbler. Perhaps it's a shoemaker. And we can hear him up late at night because it's so clear and so quiet. They continued, they became stronger, and then additional phenomena started. Furniture was moved. The touch of a cold hand was felt, and footsteps walking through the hallway and down the staircase to the cellar were heard. Mrs. Fox believed the raps to be a knocking in the east bedroom. The children were often frightened and time again slept in their parents' bedroom. On one night, the Foxes lit a candle as soon as the noises started and searched the entire house. Not a person was in sight. But once again, they settled in for the night until the bed was moved. And then the rappings continued, increasing daily. But every time, their investigation would turn up empty. On March 31st, 1848, Mrs. Fox gave strict instructions. "We are going to bed. If we hear noises, we are ignoring them." They say that she was quite exhausted. But as usual, the rappings began again. Mr. Fox did his normal search. Looking out the window, no one is there. Looking out the door, no one is there. Mrs. Fox gives this account, and I quote, "The children in the other room heard the rapping and tried to make similar sounds by snapping their fingers. My youngest child, Katie, said, 'Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do,' clapping her hands. The sounds imitated, following her with the same number of raps. When she stopped, the sound ceased for a short time. Then Maggie said, in sport, 'Now do as I do. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, without striking one hand against the other, and the raps came as before. She then said, "Oh, look, Mother, it can see as well as hear." They say that Mrs. Fox's hair turned gray overnight. Now, the family was excited but confused about the happenings and began to discuss what might be the cause of this. And one of the girls suggested that the next day was April Fool's Day and that someone was trying to trick them. Now, Mrs. Fox decided that she was going to put those rappings to a test, and she asked the noise to rap the different ages of her children. And instantly she heard the correct ages of her children in succession, including the age of Emily, who passed on in infancy. And then Mrs. Fox proceeded to ask the following questions. Is this a human being that answers my questions so correctly? There was no response. She then asked, is it a spirit? If it is, make 2 raps. The response was an immediate 2 raps. Mrs. Fox then stated, if it is an injured spirit, make 2 raps. An affirmative response quickly came, causing the house to tremble. This answer prompted the following questions, which were answered in the affirmative. Were you injured in this house? Is the person living who injured you? David came down and joined his family, and additional information was sought and recorded through calling out the letters of the alphabet one by one and waiting for a yes or no answer. By the end of the night, the messages were clear that the rapping noises were being made by the spirit of a 31-year-old father of 5. He had been murdered in the house, and his remains had been buried in the cellar. Didn't see that one coming, did ya? 1848. Whew. Mrs. Fox then asked, will you continue to rap if I call in my neighbors that they may hear it too? And again, the raps were in the affirmative, and Mr. Fox went to seek the red fields. Now, Mrs. Fox was clear when she told Mr. Fox, get the soundest minded neighbors, because this is going to blow their minds. And honestly, the neighbors thought, we're going to be in for a good laugh. This is great. Once the neighbors arrived and grasped the reality of what was taking place, the questions started again. It was revealed that the peddler had been murdered in the house about 5 years before on a Tuesday at midnight. His body had been taken to the cellar by way of the stairway and buried. The peddler stated that he had been murdered for the sum of $500. That's a lot of money. On Saturday, April 1st, the decision was made to dig below the cellar. The house was built on low ground, so they were not surprised to find water at 3 feet. They had to stop digging for the time being, but they started again in July when the water level lowered. And when they dug this time, they found pieces of crockery, traces of charcoal and quicklime, and some human hair and bones that were examined by a medical man skilled in anatomy, revealing that those bones were from a human skull. Now, the cottage remained empty. Life went on in Arcadia at David's home, where the Fox family and David's family continued to be disturbed by rappings, doors opening, touching of cold hands, the beds shaking violently. At times, it felt as if an earthquake were taking place. But through all of this, it became apparent to the Fox family that the invisible power was more prevalent in the presence of the girls, particularly Kate, the youngest. It was decided that Kate would return to Rochester with her sister Leah to perhaps reduce the phenomena. See, Mrs. Fox was smart. She still didn't think. She was like, these kids are doing it. I know they are. However, as soon as Kate and Leah left, rapping noises were heard on the packet boat as it headed to Rochester. The phenomena continued, and it continued at Lee Fox Fish's home in Rochester, and people in the community were becoming very aware of the rappings. And when Mrs. Fox heard of this occurrence, she took Maggie and hastened to Leah's side to be with her daughters. With both girls now reunited, the rappings became more pronounced. Isaac and Amy Post, Quaker friends who lived in Rochester, were consulted about the manifestations. Mr. Post suggested, let's use the alphabet again, like you guys did in Hydesville. And this was very successful. However, very long. Very long. The first message they received was, "Dear friends, you must proclaim these truths to the world. This is the dawning of a new era. You must not try to conceal it any longer. And when you do your duty, God will protect you and the good Spirit will watch over you." Now, following these instructions was not an easy task, especially for two young girls that were aged 9 and 11. But the sisters continued their demonstrations, although they were mocked and accused of trickery, fraud, joint cracking, ventriloquism, Houdini. And despite these hardships, the sisters decided that they would continue to do the work that the spirit world had outlined for them. Now, following the Spirit's orders, they organized the first public meeting for the movement of spiritualism in Corinthian Hall in Rochester. Sadly, it's no longer there. On November 14th, 1849, Mr. Eliab Capron lectured on the rapping phenomena. And Maggie and Kate stood on stage and were asked to carry out a demonstration before a large crowd. Now, in the crowd was a committee that was appointed to investigate. There were threatening cries from the audience and accusations. The girls were stripped of their clothing to prove that they were cracking their joints. They were made to stand on a table, asked to call their spirits, and when they did, the investigators would hold their toes and their ankles or any other joint that was suspected of cracking. It was Amy and Isaac Post who came to their rescue. They took the girls to their own home, offering protection. But the trials and the tribulations continued, and the Rochester Democrat, the local newspaper, published a lengthy article stating, "The humbug is about to end." Soon the sisters became known as the Rochester Rappers. Even have a drink named after them. Just 5 months later, after public meetings in Albany and New York, the demonstrations and the phenomena became accepted in some areas. Leah, Maggie, and Kate were in constant demand, and Leah took up managing their appearances. The sisters and their mother, who traveled with them in most instances, departed from the family circle to follow their calling, while John Fox was left to settle the new house in Hydesville. The girls and Mrs. Fox began their travels by going from Rochester to Albany, Buffalo, New York City, and then on to Cleveland, Ohio, and Philadelphia. It was a world tour. The sisters were fulfilling the direction that they had received from the spirit world by traveling to various cities and demonstrating the phenomena of spiritualism and to what we know today as modern spiritualism. Still with me? Here's my disclaimer. Leah Fox, not my favorite sister. Not my favorite. She starts out kind of cute. At the age of 14, Leah Fox married an older man. At the age of 14, she married an older man with the surname of Fish. And after the birth of her daughter, he deserted her. And Leah turned to music as a means of livelihood. She became the spokeswoman for the sisters. She made arrangements for their appearances. And in the prime of womanhood, Leah had no apprehension about stage appearances. Oh, she gets better. A man named Calvin Brown had been traveling with them as a protector and a friend, and Mrs. Fox had always related to him as her foster son. And Leah had always related to him as her brother. As time passed, Kelvin became very sick, and nearing death, he requested Leah's hand in marriage. In 1851, she married Kelvin, but it was a short union, for on May 4th, 1853, Kelvin passed to the spirit world. Now, Leah continued to arrange meetings, private circles, and private readings for her and her sisters. She worked very long and hard to follow the tasks the Spirit had given, even though they were still very trying times. Happiness would come to Leah again on November 2nd, 1858. When she and Daniel Underhill, were married at the home of Horace Greeley in New York City. Now, Leah had met Daniel at a séance, and she was the sitting medium. And Leah had a habit of being in trance, and when she was talking for spirit, her fingers would look like they were on fire. And at this particular time, they were so hot that she excused herself to go outside to put them in the snow. A day later, someone was walking outside, and they noticed that there was sulfur in the snowbank. And they accused her of trickery. And it was actually Daniel Underhill who came to her rescue. And maybe it was love at first sight. I don't know. I don't know. But they were married. They were married. Now, Daniel felt that Leah had done her part on behalf of spiritualism and on behalf of her sisters. And he requested that she step back from center stage. And she agreed. She had done her part. And she just wanted to live a life of luxury, happiness, and great activity. And she semi-removed herself from public service. They say that Daniel's love for her was so strong that while they were living in New York City, he actually had an atrium built for her, and he filled it with songbirds so that she could always enjoy her love for music. Very nice. Still not my favorite. I like Maggie. Not my favorite. Perhaps Maggie Fox's biggest downfall came at one of her seances in 1851 in Philadelphia. That's where she met and fell in love with Dr. Elijah Kane. He was an Arctic explorer. Has anybody ever heard of him? He has some fantastic books. Fantastic books. He planned to attend a seance where Maggie was sitting at the table so that he could possibly speak to a brother that had just passed. Now, he really wasn't into this at all, but he had heard about the Fox sisters and he wanted to check this out for himself. They say that the minute the two of them locked eyes, they fell madly in love. She was 16 and he was 32. In 1853, just 2 years after they met, they became engaged. And before Dr. Kane departed for an Arctic exploration, he planned for Maggie to have an education. And he tried to explain to her that if you are educated, if you have money, if you are Catholic, my parents might like you. Yes. And so he planned her education. And he sent her to school. And he went off on his exploration. Saddened by his departure, Maggie became very quiet and pale. And after settling in and beginning her schooling, she started to feel a sense of relief and happiness. But over the next 3 years, she would have one episode after another. She was alone and extremely unhappy. She missed Cain, she missed her mother, and she missed her sister. And she missed sitting and séances. She became very despondent and very ill, developing brain fever. Her mother was alerted and brought Maggie back to New York City to be nursed back to health. Cain's family absolutely resented his affiliation with Maggie. Before Cain departed for London and Havana in 1856, they married with her mother as a witness. And back then, it was as simple as me taking your hand, anybody's hand, and saying, I am your wife and you are my husband. That's it. We're married. He promised her that when he returned from Havana, he would take out an advertisement in the newspaper and that he would proclaim their love. Handsome fella, isn't he? 1 year later, on February 17th, 1857, Maggie was preparing to depart for Havana to meet Cain. He was getting closer. She couldn't wait anymore. They had been corresponding back and forth for almost 2.5 years. She just wanted to see him. Kate brought in a newspaper and laid it on the table. The headline read, Dr. Cain dies in Havana. His death was nearly fatal to Maggie. She suffered delirium and hysteria. Her family tried to shower her with kindness. John Fox left his beloved Hydesville to come to his daughter's side and was a great comfort to her. His compassion and persuasion drew her back. Sympathetically, he listened to Maggie's tale of grief. Her father accepted everything except her intention to embrace Catholicism. And this bothered him greatly, but he did not relate his feelings to her. John, Margaret, and Kate stood by as sponsors when Maggie adopted Catholicism. Now, one of Maggie's desires was to live alone. Kate would visit her frequently, mostly every Sunday they spent together, and they remained very close. Shortly after moving, Maggie would succumb to the effects of alcohol. She would struggle through years of grief and emptiness. She would go on tours, she would visit England, and she would hold some circles and serve those who came to her. But unfortunately, she was never the same. There were reports from neighbors that they would find her early in the morning on the steps of someone's home, and she would not have a clue how she got there. She's my favorite. Just saying. Catherine Fox, Katie, or Kate, was a dedicated medium and a spiritualist. Her closeness and sympathy for Maggie also led her to alcoholism. It was a release from her exhausting work as well as from the weight of Maggie's burden. She spent several months in a sanitarium and began séances at the home of Dr. Taylor. She basically was told that if she did not go to Dr. Taylor's home, where he had the Fox Taylor records, that she would be in a nursing home. They would have her committed to a nursing home. And back then, ladies, it was as simple as your husband saying, that woman is crazy, and you were gone. So while she was in the sanitarium, she started having seances at the home of Dr. Taylor. And they actually became very good friends and almost like family. There are records of when she stayed at Dr. Taylor's home. It's called the Fox Taylor Records. And it notes how remarkable her mediumship was. In 1871, Kate left for London. She was welcomed there and was a great success. She traveled in circles of society that connected her to many important people, including an attorney who was to become her husband. On December 14th, 1872, she married Henry Jenkin, and he insisted that she maintain her private practice of mediumship. And they say that when she walked down the aisle, even though her family could not be there, there were soft rappings heard throughout the church, as if the spirit world was like, yeah, you go. Kate became a devoted mother of 2 sons, one a gifted baby boy named Ferdinand. When he was less than 6 months old, Ferdinand was walking and talking, and they say at 9 months, he manifested automatic writing in Greek. That's what they say. I'm not making it up. They are having, Kate and Henry have a hard time keeping any nannies because the nannies would go into Ferdinand's room and see ghostly figures over his bassinet as if the spirit world was protecting him. Their second son, Henry, was always described as a sickly child. Unfortunately, Ferdinand and Henry don't live past, Ferdinand doesn't live past 23, and Henry didn't live past 18. Yeah. And of course, Ferdinand at 9 months old, well, he had a following. His fame spread throughout Europe and America. But they led a very full and happy life until Henry passed away in 1881. Now, when Henry died, Kate became distraught, of course, and it took 4 years to settle his affairs. And once this was accomplished, she packed her belongings and brought her sons back to New York. The next 10 years of her life were spent standing by Maggie and being a son to her, or being a mother to her sons. There she is. She continued giving private seances, but unfortunately still struggling with bouts of alcoholism. Through all of this, she remained a reputation as an excellent medium. On July 2nd, 1892, her friend Sarah Taylor received a telegram from Kate's eldest son. 3 words: "Mother is dead." I know. Now in 1888, something happened to both of the women. Maggie was approached by a reporter. Do you guys know this story? Usually everybody knows this story. So in 1888, Maggie was approached by a reporter, and he said to her, for $1,500, "I will give you $1,500 if you go on stage at the Music Academy in front of a crowd and tell them that you faked this whole thing." Now, when you don't have a lot of money, that's very tempting. And Maggie, being down on her luck, probably having a really bad day, said, "Okay." And at the Music Academy Hall, she stood on stage in front of a very large audience with her sister Kate in the side and told the audience that her and her sister faked it and that they just wanted to scare their mother, and they would crack their toes or hold apples behind their backs and drop them. And then their sister Leah got involved, and she was greedy, and it spiraled out of control. Now, in the United States in 1888, there were approximately 100,000 spiritualists. 80% of the population said, no way. There's no way they faked this. Not this. And then the other 20% said, of course they did. We knew all along. This was a hoax. It wouldn't be until 1904 when the bones of the peddler were found in the cottage in Hydesville that the girls would get, I don't want to say revenge, but revenge. And there's the confession, sorry. Now, let's talk about the cottage for a minute. How are we doing on time? You guys okay? Doing okay? All right, we're almost done. Yes, Lilydale. All right, so after the happenings on March 31st, 1848, the cottage retained the nickname the Spook House. And it was empty. Nobody wanted to live in the Spook House. In April of 1916, there was a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Bartlett, and he wanted to purchase the house and the property, but the Hyde family denied him. And so he made a deal to buy the house. And he took the house apart, board by board, board by board, windows, doors, hardware. He had it placed on a barge. It went all the way up the canal to Buffalo, and from Buffalo it went on a truck, and then the truck went to Lilydale. In Lilydale, he put it back together. He restored it. There was a medium by the name of Miss Flo Cottrell. She was what they called a rapping medium. So her communication was rapping noises like the Fox sisters. And she was in charge of the cottage. But on September 21st, 1955, the cottage caught on fire and burned to the ground. The only thing left was the Fox family Bible, a tea kettle, and a sign that was above the door that said spiritualism originated here in 1848. Now, back at the original site of the cottage on Hydesville Road, the replica of a cottage was constructed on the original stone foundation, and that is the replica cottage. And the gentleman down there in the window was John Drummond. And Mr. Drummond was a Canadian citizen who came in about 1960. And he came to the property and he looked around and said, this looks like a great place to build a house. And so he did. He built an exact replica of the Fox cottage. And he lived in this cottage. On the other half of the property, he started a spiritualist camp, like Lilydale, but much smaller. There was a monument that was donated by Mercy Cadwallader, and it stood in the front yard, and you can see it right there by the railing. And the monitor states, the birthplace of modern spiritualism, upon this site stood the Hydesville Cottage, the home of the Fox sisters, through whose mediumship communication with the spirit world was established, March 31st, 1848. There is no death. There are no dead. Sadly, Mr. Drummond was putting a piece of wood into his wood stove when a spark came out and started a fire. At the time, Mr. Drummond was 84. As they were putting him into the back of the ambulance, he said, don't worry, I'll be back. I'm gonna rebuild. Sadly for him, the town had other ideas, and they did a controlled burn, and that is the controlled burn. Mr. Drummond is buried on the property with his wife, Edith. And this is what it looks like today. Can you see that? Sorry. This is what it looks like today. This is the Hydesville Memorial Park. It used to be the Hydesville Memorial Park Project. And it was started in 1998 when the National Association of Spiritualist Churches decided that they were going to clear the property and do something to commemorate modern spiritualism on this site. Inside the walls, we have the original foundation from 1814 that Dr. Hyde built. This is our Pomeroy sign that we applied for and were given in 2016. And it says, the Fox sisters on this site, events of March 31st, 1848, began sisters Maggie and Kate Fox's central role in the origin of modern spiritualism. Has anybody ever tried to get a Pomeroy sign? It's difficult, isn't it? You have to be very specific. You can't be leading, you can't be suggestive, you have to have the facts. Because I was in charge of this one. And every time I say this, you guys are gonna laugh when I say it, but when I turned 40, I said to my husband, I'm old and I have to join the Historical Society. And he said, okay, have fun with that. So we live in Newark, and I joined the Newark Arcadia Historical Society. And we were trying to get 5 historical markers for 5 different sites, obviously. And I said, which one do you guys want me to work on? And they went, duh, you can work on the Fox sisters. And it was, I'm thinking, this is easy. You give them the information, they're gonna put it on a sign, but it's not easy. And even when you have the facts, you have to prove it. So I had to prove the Fox sisters existed. I had to prove that they lived in Hydesville. I had to prove that they went to Rochester and did all these things. And it was not easy. And I really wanted the sign to have some sort of, Mr. Drummond and the peddler and, kind of put everybody on there. And they each time said, nope, 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 fix it, nope. And I would cry. And I would fix it. And then finally I said, all right, this is it. This is what we're coming up with. And it's okay. It's okay. Because we got our sign and people see it now and we're recognized. And that's really all I wanted, was for them to be recognized. Now the big day came on our 175th anniversary of modern spiritualism. And I called the mayor, Jonathan Taylor, who I went to school with him, so it was an easy phone call. And I said, hey, do you think that we could get a proclamation stating that March 31st is Hydesville Day? Because as a spiritualist, we celebrate it, and it is known as Hydesville Day. We have a song that says, take me to Hydesville. We open the property every year on March 31st, and we talk about the sisters. And he said, sure, no problem. And I gave him the facts. And this is what he came up with. And I think the last sentence is the best. Now, therefore, be it resolved that on this day, March 31st, 2023, and every March 31st thereafter, be proclaimed as Hydesville Day by the village of Newark. And that made me very happy. Very happy. And there is our beloved cottage. And that is the sign that you will find if you go to Lilydale and go to their museum and ask them. I think they have that in the case. They do have the peddler's tin pack. Because in 1904, there were school kids playing in the basement of the house, of the spook house. And one of the kids fell, and he fell into the wall. And the wall broke apart, and out spilled bones and the peddler's tin pack. So, I know, right? Now, sadly, after the fire in Lilydale, we didn't have, any part of the original house, which is very sad, because as a historian or, even someone who just loves history, you always want something like that you can touch, but you're not supposed to touch it because it's history. And it was probably about 5 years ago, I got a phone call, and it was this girl that I had recently met, and her great aunt and uncle lived down the road from us. And she called and she said, oh, we were just going through some of their things. We're getting ready, we're going to go sell the house. They had both passed away. And I said, oh gosh, if you need anything, let me know. I would love to come down. They were great people. And she said, well, we were going through my aunt's drawers, and I found something, and I believe it belongs to you. And I thought, I never gave her anything she would put in her drawers. Like, that was weird. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, oh, no, I would rather see you in person. I was like, okay. And she said, well, meet me at the Fox property. Yeah. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to get weird. I was like, okay, sure, why not? And so I met her at the Fox property, and she had like this box. And she said, here, this is for you. And I think it's from my great aunt, because I think she knew eventually, this was going to happen. And I was like, okay. Well, inside it was a board from the original house. And it was all wrapped up. There was a note on the back that said, a board from the original house in Hydesville with the date 1915. And then this little letter explaining how her and her sister were riding bikes to go see the old spook house get taken down, and she took a board. Now, if you knew this woman, she was as straight-laced as you could possibly get. Like, to me, she was a saint. So I just stood there looking at it thinking, she did that? That's incredible. Like, that was wonderful. But the note explained, how they were just kind of riding around, and she saw the board, and she took it home, and she wrapped it up, and she never told anybody. And she just kept it in the back of her drawer. And then when she got married, she took the dresser with her, and they never had children. So when her great niece was cleaning out the drawer, she was like, this is for you, it's all yours. Oh, wow. So I am very lucky that I have a piece of the original house, and that will stay with me forever. I also, I have the skeleton key for the front door. Oh, because the original foundation was covered with dirt, and we dug out the basement. So we actually went down, I think, about 6 feet to dig it out, and then we put fill dirt in to secure the walls. And I was in charge of the front section. My daughter was in the back, and she was like, I'm finding all this glass and pottery, and I'm like, good, keep going, this is fun. And she was like 13, and so she's putting it in a box, and I'm like, I'm not finding anything. And so it would be my luck, I'll find a bone or something, and we'll have to stop. And then all of a sudden I like hit something, and it made that ding, and I'm like, ooh, what's this? And I'm digging and digging, and there it is. It's a skeleton key, it's this big, and it was right where the front door was. So I'm very lucky to have that. Oh, there's so many stories. So many. But are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
So do you think Mrs. Bell killed the peddler?
No, I think Mr. Bell did.
Mr. Bell?
The peddler did name his assailant, and he did say Mr. Bell. But who's going to listen to a spirit? No one. They did question him, And he said, no, I would never do that. There's actually sworn affidavits saying, oh, Mr. Bell was a great guy, good neighbor, sound man. But then there were also sworn affidavits about what was happening in the house too. So, you know, back then it was your word against them.
Well, especially since she loved all her little stuff she got from the peddler.
Yes. Well, and, you know, they say, and it is written in many, many books and many documents, including some from the family, that she greeted him as if he were an old friend. Yeah. Mr. Bell wasn't having any of it. Yes. Anybody else? Yeah.
Just an interesting comment. So there's a movie came out, I think it was 23. It was called A Ghost Story. And an interesting part of the picture, you wouldn't think anything about it, but it's from the, instead of being, quote, scared of spiritualism or here you go, it was from the side, it was from the story of the ghost. So you see this from the 15, 16, you know, living in the same house. And as the people came and moved in and out, this was the story of this ghost and how he's, you know,
I think that's very interesting.
it's a very different perspective of a picture.
It is. I literally live in two worlds. With our museums, we are historically haunted. And people come, we don't talk about it. So if you were to walk in, we're not gonna say, hey, guess what? We have spirits, you wanna see them? But if you walked in and said, is this place haunted? That kind of opens the door for us to be like, oh, we can talk about this. And one of the things that we've always said is, you know, these guys must be so happy when we leave on Saturday. And we do paranormal investigations. So we get people that come in and, you know, talk to our spirits. And I just, you know, I leave the place sometimes at 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm like, goodbye, you're in charge. And I can just see them going, it's about time. Like, oh my gosh. And my girlfriend and I always joke because, you know, they have these things called spirit boxes. And, you know, the whole thing is you can basically hear spirit through this radio. It's an AM or FM radio, and it scans through the channels really fast. So what you want to do is ask a question and hope that they answer you through this communication. And there is this very funny video, I don't know if it was Instagram or Facebook, but it had two best friends in a haunted house and they had passed and there were people hovered around a spirit box and they were saying, you know, what day is it? And the girl says, I like beef. You know, like just to make fun of this is what they're saying. So you never know until you try. It's fun. My favorite thing is table tipping. You guys ever table tipped?
What?
Oh, table tipping. It's so much fun. You guys, an education tonight. Well, Vicki, it was nice. Thanks for having me, one and only. Table tipping is where you and a bunch of people just sit around a table and you place your hands, you know, like this. Nobody moves. You just keep your hands on the table. And then somebody starts talking to the table. And if spirit feels like it, it will move the table. And we did it Friday, October 10th. One of the ladies who used to live in one of our museums was a spiritualist. And we celebrate her birthday every year. And she was a huge sponsor of the Fox property. She helped get monuments for the property and things like that. And we were at her dining room table Friday night and just asked her if she could move the table. And in front of 10 people, she did. And we recorded it on our security cameras because I was barefoot. So first thing I'm thinking is like, the table's moving, I have no shoes on, and this thing is from 1826. It's going to crush me. And then we had another medium at the table, and he's done this before, and I was waiting for him to say, everybody stand up, because that's usually what you do is once it moves, you stand up and then it moves. But he didn't, thankfully, and I was just like, oh my gosh. But I do have it on video, so it happened. Yeah.
I just have a question. Were you at, I'm sorry.
Nope,
At Josh Gates' talk,
I was.
and you asked the question about the foxes.
I did, yes.
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 And he was very intrigued, which I couldn't
He
believe
is.
did not know about the foxes.
Josh doesn't know a lot of
Find out
things.
that they're coming to interview you.
That is a near future possibility that I can't talk about.
Okay, I got it.
Yes, in the back.
I just wondered where you got a lot of your research. Was it just written down or recorded or pictures, or was it the Historical Society or primary sources?
A lot of primary sources. I became friends with a woman whose mother, or whose great grandmother was married to David Fox's son. So they had a lot of the material. She actually, yes, they had diaries. No, they kept a lot of stuff. It's very interesting because there is a museum in Indiana that actually has the christening cap and the christening gown of the Fox siblings. They have Leah's and Kate and Maggie's hair, like braided. They have John Fox's spectacles. So, you know, I had planned a trip to go and I wanted to talk to them, but COVID came. So that ruined it for a while. So that is one of the things that I'm going to be doing. Some things I just know, and I can't explain it. I just know.
Were you going to go there to ask them to give it back to their original source? Or?
I don't think so, because where it is, it's safe, and at the end of the day, that's what's important. You know, it would be great if we had a really nice little museum on the Fox property, but honestly, spiritualism, even in 2025, still scares people. It is not unusual for windows to be broken, eggs to be thrown, and honestly, it's no different than any other religion. Absolutely no other religion. I think the only thing different, and I grew up as a Lutheran, because my mother said, my house, my rules. And when I moved out, I was like, whew, I can go do this now. But it's no different. You know, we have churches, we pray, we sing, we, you know, have offerings. During our church services, we give healings. And then towards the end, we give messages. So it's really not different. You know, my husband is Catholic. We go to Mass for his mother. It's the same thing. Sit, stand, kneel. And he's written a song. It's actually pretty good. But yes, yes.
So what happened to the peddler spirit? Is it still knocking around?
You know, I think that he is still there. I think there's an essence of him. Mr. Drummond is definitely at the property. There was a movie many years ago called The House in Hydesville. They played it, I can't remember what theater it was. It was a while ago. But that night I had said to my husband, because we were invited to go, and I said, before we go, I just want to do a quick walk around the property. And I was walking around the property and I could hear like little girls crying. And I thought, this will be interesting. And also one of the light fixtures had started to burn. So we had to like cut the power, because fire is horrible for the Fox property. So we went to the play, and it was okay. It was dark, and it portrayed them, I was okay until the very end when they had them, standing on stage with their hands behind them, dropping apples. And then that was it. And I thought, but that's not it. It doesn't stop there. And of course, my husband said, at the end, he stood up and said, if you want to know the real story, she's right here, ask her. And I thought, I'm going to kill him. This is it. Like, oh my gosh. But, for me, I think when I first started doing this, I was very quiet. Because, you don't want to offend people. Just because I believe it doesn't mean you have to. And I think that's the great thing about being a human and living in America is, just because you like it doesn't mean I have to. And I have never pushed their story on anybody. And if you think they faked it, that's fine. And if you think they didn't, that's fine too. Because at the end of the day, it's up to you. And all I can do is give you the facts. But I wanted to make sure that people knew these were real women that grew up in a time where it was almost impossible to be a woman. We didn't vote. We couldn't own property. We were property. And for them to be able to, at such a young age, hear something and not be afraid. And I think that's what it was with, the Weekman children were very young, and they were hearing the noises, but they didn't get, nothing in their head clicked to say, oh, let's see if we can talk to the spirit, where I think Kate and Maggie were kind of like, oh my gosh, we're bored out here in Hickville, let's play. And thankfully they did. Because it did turn into the communication that they got. Had they never found the peddler's bones, I'd probably be sitting here going, yeah, right, you're a whack job. There's no way. Just literally 6 months ago, I was sitting inside the enclosure, and it was just me, and I was just sitting there for a minute, and I thought, I was looking at the little stones, and I thought, oh my gosh. It never occurred to me, like, why rapping noises? Why not like thunder or, pounding or something like that? And then I'm looking at all these little rocks in the foundation, and I thought, oh, what if he wasn't dead? What if he got buried and he was using the rock to tap? Because he wasn't physically put in the ground. And it's hard to explain it unless you see the property. But he literally was, if you think of a square, the wall was here. They laid him as close to the wall as they possibly could and then put up another wall. Right. So when you walked into the basement, you would see a basement, but you wouldn't know there's another 2 feet until, we're all standing down looking at it. So it occurred to me at that moment that what if he was behind there, I'm here. And that's what his eternity was like.
I'll give you another sideline. It's famous is in Whitehall, or the beginning of the U.S. Navy, up in Champlain. If you go up to the top of the hill, on the east side, you go to the very top of the hill, you see the old clock, and there's a restaurant. I don't remember the name of the restaurant, but I forget the name, the general's house. And what it was that he owned the property, but he didn't want the British to take over it, and he was giving a lease that he could stay, the house would stay in his name, his family would get it as opposed to turn it over, as long as he's upright in the house. And they're thinking upright, not be buried. So when you go there, in the corner of this old stone from the 1700s, he's buried upright, and the wall closes around him, and there's some flowers, and of course
what a smart man.
We didn't go there for that reason, but we actually went up there and went to have a dessert, the white tablecloths, and so we sit in the corner and have a dessert. We're looking out at the canal coming down, the lake, and then we're reading on the placemat, And I go, oh, he's right there.
He's right
He
there.
was buried in the wall. So there are other people that are buried upright
Yeah.
for a reason, you know.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Hey, desperate people do desperate things. Yeah. Any other questions? I don't want to keep you guys too long. Yeah.
There's no evidence that the girls were manipulated by an older adult mother, whomever.
I don't think so. What I gave you is very brief. My lectures are like 2 hours because I've done such extensive research. I think, for Mrs. Fox, this was horrible. This was like worst case scenario. Back then it was, you were either on the side of good and God, or you were on the side of bad and the devil. And when Kate says Mr. Splitfoot, that's actually who she's calling out to, because Mr. Splitfoot was another fancy name for the devil without saying the devil. Because they thought, it was the torso of a man and then the body of a goat. So, for her, she would give explicit instructions to the girls. I don't care what you hear. I don't care what you see. You need to ignore it. And they noticed that the more they ignored it, the worse it got. And there was a very short time when they lived with David that it did stop completely. The spirits, for whatever reason, said, okay, fine, you want us to go away? We're going away. And then the girls started to miss it. It was kind of like that comforting voice in their ears. And so, they kind of said, no, we want you to come back. Whatever you say, we'll do. And that's basically, the spirit world said, this is what we want you to do. We want you to go out. We want you to talk about it. You've got to demonstrate it so that people can see, we're here. And one of their messages that they received from some of the spirits were, we're still here. We still see you. We still love you. Don't forget us. And I think, that's pretty profound, because at the end of the day, you miss your loved ones that have passed, and it's hard. And, honestly, if it brings you comfort, then what's wrong? I'm not saying I want to go home and, no, I would say I want to go home and see my grandma and my grandpa. I would love to see them, because they were a staple in my life. And my earliest memory is 2 years old, and my grandmother was killed by a drunk driver. And I explicitly, to this day, remember her sitting on the end of my bed and telling me, it's going to be okay, and you're going to be fine. And, and I woke up crying, and my mom's like, what's wrong? And I said, Grandma's dead, 2 years old. And my mom will attest to it. It was very vivid. And then we found out she had been killed in an accident. So, it's one of those things. But, yeah. So, anybody else? You are released. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.